Hello and welcome to the Sprint 146 review. Yeah. As usual, I'll give the overview. Harpreet will fill us in on the UI, Adam on the providers, Jovi on the platform, and Alberto on the API. So the most exciting thing I want to announce is that the Yansa release is finally G8. We put a blog post out about it a couple of days ago. So congratulations to everyone for making it happen. It's great to see it over the finish line, and hopefully users can start seeing lots of benefits from it. We're now working on the Kasparov release next. Some exciting things that Kasparov brings to the table are 3 providers that are quite active: IBM Cloud, NSXT support, as well as IBM's Terraform support. You can see everything that's going on in ManageIQ on the roadmap link on the bottom there. There we go. All right. So this sprint, we had similar numbers to Sprint 145. So we had 196 pull requests merged, 218 opened, and 348 total still open. It's kind of good to see that the IBM activity showing up in these numbers. There's lots of people from IBM working on all these different providers, as well as kind of helping us out on the UI and some other areas. So it's great to see a lot of input from IBM and reflected in the numbers here. In terms of the spread of the pull requests, 57 were bugs, 54 enhancements, so a nice even kind of spread between the two. This is the health of the core repositories, and this is the health of the provider repositories. So as you can see, the ratings on most of these are A's, and then there's kind of lots of issues to address in some repositories more than in others. So if anyone's kind of feeling brave or wants to kind of do something a little different, you could always go to any of the repos, go to Code Climate, and kind of see what it's reporting, and see if you want to tackle any of those things. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Harpreet.
Thanks, Oleg. Hello, everyone. So total of 29 PRs were merged in UI repos. Out of that, 14 were bug fixes and 10 enhancements. Main enhancements and bug fixes are listed here with links to the PRs. Enhancements include adding some additional info to textual summary screens, and David was working on fixing some bugs in the DDF form components. Next slide, please. Support for new type of provisioning was added for IBM Power virtual servers. Screenshots here show fields specific to the new type of provisioning. Next slide, please. Another major change that affects all of the list views was to convert the list view to React. There's no visual changes as such to the list view itself, but with this conversion, as you can see here, pagination used to be at the bottom of the screen, and the select all checkbox used to be at the bottom of the screen. But with the new conversion, you can see the pagination is part of the list view, always on the top of this list. And the select all checkbox was moved inside the table with the next to the headers. And since these list views are everywhere in the product, if you guys encounter any issues, please feel free to open GitHub issue, or if you find anything missing feature-wise, please open an issue for that. And that's all for the UI for this time. Over to Adam.
Thanks, Harpreet. So this sprint for core, most of the enhancements were around label to tag mapping, which is something we're trying to improve and enhance for this coming release. So originally the tag mapper was specific to the container provider. Then we enabled it for a couple of cloud providers, specifically Amazon and Azure. It was still called Container Label Tag Mapper, so we renamed that so it's just Provider Tag Mapper now. And we moved it into a common shared location in the persister so that it can be used by any of the other managers. And we also moved some code which had been duplicated in each of the provider refresh classes up into core so that it's just part of the persister class when you inherit from it. And you'll see where we make use of that in some later slides. On the IBM Terraform side, they added a couple of fields to configuration profiles and configured systems so that they can track what type of platform either scripts or configured systems are targeted for, even if we don't have a provider for it in ManageIQ. So if you're, deploying something onto Alibaba, the target platform will say Alibaba, even if we don't have that provider available. So you can see where things are going, even without a ManageIQ provider. Next slide. So there's a lot of work going on the IBM cloud side. Part of that is because there's actually 2 cloud providers in one, which I guess we'll also get to in the next slide. But so on the Power Virtual Servers side, they have the improved provisioning forms, which Harpreet showed. Basically, that allows you to specify a more finer grain control over the number of CPUs. They actually allow you to have a fractional value for the CPUs, which wasn't something that we had already. So that's enabled on the provider side and bubbled all the way up to the UI. We also collect those assigned virtual cores for instances from refresh now. And we're also collecting system types, which are mapped as flavors to the from the IBM Cloud Power side, and also the cloud volume types, which is something that you can select when you're provisioning what type of storage you want to put the disks on. They also added support for collecting VMs, cloud volumes, and subnet deletion. So all of those operations have been implemented on the delete. And continue to add spec coverage. So those 2 PRs add spec coverage for, I think, subnets and the network manager. And here's what the new storage type selection and the fractional processor selection looks like for the provision. Next slide. So the new cloud provider this sprint is Virtual Private Cloud, which is the x86 equivalent for the Power Virtual Servers. So if you want to go and check out the description, there's a link to the IBM docs on that. And as you'd expect, the first sprint for a new provider, there's lots of refresh enhancements, basically all the discovery for availability zones, key pairs. They already have a network manager, so they're getting cloud networks and subnets, floating IPs. So it's really, really great to see the flurry of activity from a bunch of new contributors adding a lot of refresh enhancements for that provider. They also have a full public roadmap. So if you want to see issue 28, that has the set of things which have been completed, the things they're looking at adding. So that's the full roadmap for that provider. Next slide. And on the vSphere side, we added a collection of customization specs. This was something that we missed when we moved from the old style of refresh to graph refresh. We fixed an exception which was happening when you deleted a host, which is naturally something that we, at least I personally hadn't tried before. I don't think they would let me delete a host from our dev VC. What was happening was we go and we collect properties that we don't want to cache at the time that we get an update for an object. And when the host was being deleted, we were then trying to go and get attributes for something which didn't exist anymore. So it was a pretty easy fix to just say, oh, don't get these uncached properties if it was deleted. Lucy also was doing a lot of work on adding support for deployment of content libraries, which is really cool. So it's basically a hosted OVF that you can provision VMs from. And so she added the operation to the orchestration template, which is 617, and an OVF service that allows you to deploy it in 629. And if you want to see the full description, see that feature there, see that issue which describes everything. We also added support for tags and custom attributes, which is a much more user-friendly way of doing tagging, which was added in vSphere 6. It's a totally separate API, so we hadn't supported it until now, but now that we're doing the content library, which is using the vSphere Automation SDK, it happens to be the same API that the new tags come from. So it was easier for us to say, oh, let's also go and get tags, which also kicked off the work to try to make the tag mapper a little bit more generic. So we're now collecting tags. We always collected custom attributes, but the tags are a new way of doing it in VMware 6 and a lot easier for people to understand and to use. And we're also mapping these labels to tags the same way that we do for containers and cloud providers. And that's it for providers. Over to Jim. Oh, I forgot I had screenshots, sorry. So this is what the tags and custom attributes look like. So if you go to the top menu, you can see tags and custom attributes. You can create tags and categories here. Next slide. Here's what it looks like when it's assigned to a VM. And on the Manage IQ side, this is what it looks like on the VM dashboard. You can see it's at the bottom there. That should be it.
Next slide.
Next slide, please.
Brian. There we go.
Here we go. Okay, so 27. Good job, Adam. That's impressive. A lot of work done. Anyway, on the platform space, there were 27 PRs merged this sprint. Some noteworthy enhancements that were contributed are there was one to manage the CR, which will allow labels to be updated and all the fields in the CR to be populated in OpenShift. A couple of enhancements were contributed toward the new Terraform plugin support, moving that rock forward. And one enhancement was contributed toward a parent project to support the ability to track and revoke user sessions. And another enhancement was contributed to use the rapid development RD Kafka client, which will improve performance and stability. And for bugs, one was fixed to correct the install operators displayed in the console. And another bug was fixed where provisioning would fail by replacing VM types in customization specs. And that's it in the platform space, and on to Alberto for the rest.
Thank you, Joe. The first PR with David H. So for editing zones, we supported the standard post, but we also needed that support for the put and patch methods for editing them. So showing an example here with just a patch method. And yep, next slide, please. Okay, yeah. So over the last several sprints, there's been tons of work on investigating the API performance by Joe R., Nick, Keenan, Jason, the rest of the team. Here we have a couple of PRs from Nickel making the performance improvements on the API. From a high level, since with the API you can query any physical, virtual attribute relationships or resources, the main approach, here is that we dynamically now introspect the virtual attributes being queried in order to determine what models and relationships to preload in the initial queries done by the API. So without changing the API signatures, here are a couple of examples where these N+1s got squashed. Next slide, please. So yeah, so while fixing, I think one of those enhancements dealing with RBAC, we can now query for a secondary association attribute in such cases. So showing here the example with the extra dot and the dot notation of attributes. So that's it. So big shout out to Nickel for bringing these really non-trivial PRs over to the finish line. Great work here. And that's it for the API. Next slide.
Okay, and that brings sprint 146 to a close. The next sprint will be in 2 weeks, on October 14th, same time. And I want to thank everyone for all their contributions. Again, I want to give a shout out to everyone for helping bring Yansa to a GA level. And let's go and make Kasparov great. All right, thanks everyone.